Jerusalem was not prepared for what happened the moment Jesus died. At the very hour the Son of God took his final breath, the sky turned black, the earth began to break apart, and something inside the temple was torn open forever. Roman soldiers froze in fear. Priests stood speechless. And somewhere beneath the streets of Jerusalem, tombs were beginning to open. This was not a normal execution. This was the moment creation itself reacted to the death of its creator. It was the middle of Passover. The city was overflowing with pilgrims from every corner of the ancient world. Voices filled the streets. Sacrifices burned at the temple. The sun should have been blazing above Jerusalem. Instead, a terrifying darkness swallowed the land without warning. Matthew chapter 27 verse 45 says, "From noon until 3 in the afternoon darkness came over all the land." This could not have been a natural eclipse. Passover always took place during a full moon, making a solar eclipse impossible. Everyone understood that something supernatural was happening. Fear spread through the city. Parents pulled their children close. Even hardened Roman soldiers began looking toward the sky in confusion. And then the ground moved. Not a small tremor. A violent earthquake shook Jerusalem at the exact moment Jesus cried out and surrendered his spirit. Stones cracked apart. The hills around Golgotha split open. Deep beneath the temple, the massive veil separating humanity from the Holy of Holies was suddenly torn from top to bottom. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51 declares, "At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split. That veil was nearly impossible to tear by human strength. Yet in one instant, the barrier between sinful man and a holy God was opened. The old covenant was breaking apart before the eyes of the priests. But the signs did not stop there. The gospel records that tombs opened across the region. Holy men and women who had died were raised after Jesus' resurrection and appeared to many in Jerusalem. Death itself was beginning to lose its grip. Even the centurion, standing beneath the cross, could not deny what he had witnessed. Matthew chapter 27 verse 54 says, "Surely he was the Son of God." Think about that moment. A Roman executioner, a man trained to crush weakness and obey Caesar alone, now trembling before a dying man on a cross. These were not random events. The darkness, the earthquake, the torn veil, the open graves. All of creation was testifying to one truth. Jesus was exactly who he claimed to be. And what happened in those final hours did not just change Jerusalem. It changed the destiny of the world forever. The darkness did not arrive slowly. One moment, Jerusalem stood beneath the blazing Passover sun. The next, the light vanished from the sky, as if creation itself had been covered by a funeral veil. The streets had been overflowing with worshippers, celebrating one of the holiest seasons in Israel's history. Pilgrims crowded the temple courts. Merchants shouted through the city. Lambs were being prepared for sacrifice. And then everything stopped. A heavy darkness swallowed the land. Matthew chapter 27 verse 45 says, "From noon until 3 in the afternoon darkness came over all the land." This was no ordinary storm rolling across Judea. No eclipse could occur during Passover because the feast always happened during a full moon. The scribes understood it. The Romans understood it. Every person staring upward realized they were witnessing something beyond human explanation. Fear spread through Jerusalem within moments. Conversations faded into silence. Children clung to their parents. Even the atmosphere itself felt different, thick and oppressive, as though the world were holding its breath, waiting for something catastrophic to happen. But centuries earlier, the prophet Amos had already spoken about this exact moment. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. The darkness was not random, it was a sign. Creation was responding to the suffering of Christ. As Jesus hung upon the cross, heaven's judgment against sin was falling upon him. The one who had healed the blind, calmed storms, and raised the dead was now carrying the full weight of humanity's rebellion. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 5 declares, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities." Every lash, every nail, every moment beneath that blackened sky pointed toward the cost of redemption. The light of the world was being rejected by the world he created. John chapter 1 verse 5 says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Yet for a brief moment, darkness seemed to reign. The sky above Golgotha became a visible warning that something eternal was taking place. This was more than suffering, more than an execution. Heaven and earth were colliding in front of human eyes, and while the crowd stood frozen beneath that unnatural darkness, another force was already beginning to move beneath the ground itself. The earth was preparing to answer the death of its creator. The darkness had barely settled over Jerusalem when the ground itself began to react. At first, it was a faint vibration beneath the feet of the soldiers standing near the cross. Small stones shifted down the hillside. Dust trembled across the rocks of Golgotha. Some in the crowd looked around in confusion, unsure whether they had truly felt it. Then the earth began to shake with terrifying force. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51 says, "At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, the shaking spread violently across Jerusalem. Buildings groaned, temple walls trembled. Pilgrims stumbled through crowded streets, searching for stability, but nothing felt secure anymore. Massive stones cracked apart as if the foundations of the city itself were collapsing. This was not an ordinary earthquake. The same earth that had carried humanity since the days of Adam was now reacting to the death of the one who created it. The mountains he had formed, the seas he had spoken into existence, the ground beneath every living person, all of it responded when Christ gave up his spirit. The prophet Nahum once wrote, "The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt away. The earth trembles at his presence." Now that trembling had returned to Jerusalem, many watching that scene would have remembered Mount Sinai when the presence of God descended before Moses and the whole mountain trembled violently. But this moment was even more astonishing. Sinai shook because God had come down in power. Golgotha shook because the Son of God was dying before the world. And the deeper meaning behind the earthquake was impossible to ignore. Everything connected to the old covenant was beginning to break apart. The system of sacrifice, the barriers inside the temple, the separation between God and humanity. What had stood for centuries was now being shaken at its core. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 26 declares, "Once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens." This was heaven announcing the arrival of something greater. The earthquake became a warning to some and a revelation to others. Nothing built by human hands was permanent anymore. The old world was cracking open in front of them, and then something even more terrifying happened. The earthquake did not only destroy, it uncovered. Matthew chapter 27 verse 52 says, "The tombs broke open. Ancient graves split apart across the region. Burial chambers sealed for generations suddenly stood exposed. Death itself was being challenged while Jesus still hung upon the cross. The people of Jerusalem were witnessing something no empire, no priesthood, and no army could explain. The earth was testifying that this was not the defeat of Christ. It was the beginning of a victory the world had never seen before. But before that victory could be revealed, another sign was about to unfold inside the temple itself. Inside the temple, the sacred barrier that had stood for generations was about to be torn open before the eyes of the priests. So stay with me until the end of this story, because the next sign changed everything forever. While the city still trembled, the next sign was already unfolding in the most sacred place in Jerusalem. While Jerusalem trembled beneath the earthquake, an even greater shock was unfolding inside the temple. Hidden behind thick walls stood the veil of the Holy of Holies, the sacred curtain that separated sinful humanity from the presence of God. For generations, that barrier had stood untouched. Only the high priest could pass beyond it, and only once each year with sacrificial blood. But the moment Jesus gave up his spirit, the impossible happened. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51 says, "At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This was no small tear at the edge of worn fabric. The veil was enormous, woven thick with scarlet, blue and purple threads. Ancient records describe it as far too heavy for human strength to rip apart. Yet suddenly it split open from the top downward, as if the hand of heaven itself had reached into the temple. Priests carrying out their duties would have frozen in terror. The incense still burned. Sacrifices were still being prepared. Everything had followed the same pattern for centuries, until that instant. Then the barrier was gone. The Holy of Holies, once hidden from human eyes, now stood exposed. The meaning was undeniable. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 to 20 declares, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is, his body." The torn veil represented far more than damaged cloth. It revealed that the separation between God and humanity was ending through Christ himself. No earthly priest could remove sin permanently. No animal sacrifice could fully open the way. But Jesus, through his own sacrifice, accomplished what the old system never could. The barrier fell because the final sacrifice had been made. For centuries, people approached God through fear, distance, and ritual. Now access was being opened through Christ alone. The temple had always pointed toward this moment. Every sacrifice, every altar, every drop of blood, all of it was preparing for the cross. And as the veil hung torn before the priests, another terrifying sign was already spreading beyond the city walls. The graves themselves were beginning to open, and what followed became one of the most astonishing miracles recorded in Scripture. Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 to 53, gives us one of the most extraordinary accounts in all of Scripture. The tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Let that sink in for a moment. The dead were rising, not just one person, not just a vision or a dream. Many holy people, saints who had died in faith, believers who had fallen asleep waiting for God's promise, were suddenly, miraculously, undeniably alive again. The earthquake had cracked open their tombs, but this wasn't just structural damage. This was death itself losing its authority. The graves that had held these faithful servants of God for years, perhaps decades, could no longer contain them. The power of Jesus' sacrifice was so great that it reached backward through time, forward through eternity, and downward into the very depths of death. But notice the timing. The tombs opened when Jesus died, but the saints didn't enter the city until after his resurrection. Even in this miraculous moment, Jesus remained the firstborn from the dead. He was the pioneer, the one who blazed the trail through death and into life. These holy ones followed in his footsteps, but they didn't precede him. Can you imagine the scene? Picture yourself walking through the streets of Jerusalem 3 days after the crucifixion. The city is still buzzing with rumors about the darkness, the earthquake, the torn veil, and then you see him, your grandfather who died when you were young, your wife who passed away last winter, your friend who was buried just outside the city walls. They're walking, talking, breathing. They're recognizably themselves, yet somehow different, transformed, glorified, very much alive. This wasn't resurrection as we often imagine it, some distant future event. This was resurrection happening right now, in real time, in the middle of history. Death was being challenged, defeated, reversed. The prophet Ezekiel had seen this in a vision, the valley of dry bones, where God asked, "Can these bones live?" And then he breathed life into them, and they stood up, a vast army. Now that ancient prophecy was being fulfilled in the streets of Jerusalem. But who were these holy ones? We're not told their names, but we can imagine. Perhaps some of the Old Testament saints, Abraham, David, Daniel, getting a preview of the resurrection life that awaited all believers. Perhaps recent believers who had died in faith, now vindicated by Jesus' sacrifice. What did they say to the people they encountered? How did they explain their presence? We're not given those details, but we can be certain of this. Their very existence was a testimony to the power of Jesus' death and resurrection. If death lost its grip even before the third day, what does that say about the authority of Christ? What does it say about the hope we have in him? Can you imagine seeing a loved one, long buried, walking toward you again? The shock, the joy, the overwhelming realization that death isn't the end after all. That Jesus' promise of resurrection life isn't just future hope, it's present reality. These risen saints were living proof that Jesus' sacrifice had cosmic implications. His death didn't just pay for sin, it reversed the curse. It didn't just provide forgiveness, it conquered death itself. Even Rome's executioners, trained to deal with death as a daily reality, had no explanation for what they were witnessing, but one man among them saw the truth and couldn't keep silent. As the graves opened across Jerusalem, one man standing beneath the cross could no longer deny what he had witnessed. The Roman centurion had seen death countless times before. Executions were part of his duty. He had watched rebels scream in rage, criminals beg for mercy, and condemned men curse Rome with their final breath. But nothing about Jesus was ordinary. He saw the darkness consume the sky. He felt the earthquake beneath his feet. He watched the temple veil tear apart from a distance through the chaos spreading across the city. And he watched Jesus die unlike any man he had ever seen. Even while suffering on the cross, Jesus spoke words of forgiveness. Luke chapter 23 verse 34 says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." No hatred, no panic, no desperate cries for revenge, only authority, only mercy, only surrender to the will of the Father. The centurion understood that something far greater than an execution was taking place on that hill. Matthew chapter 27 verse 54 says, "Surely he was the Son of God." Those words carried enormous weight coming from a Roman officer. This was a man trained to serve Caesar above all else. Yet standing before the crucified Christ, his entire understanding of power began to collapse. The same soldier who had overseen the crucifixion was now openly confessing the identity of Jesus. What shook him was not only the earthquake outside. Something inside him was breaking apart as well. For the first time, he realized he was not witnessing defeat. He was witnessing sacrifice. The cross no longer looked like weakness. It looked like purpose. Every supernatural sign surrounding Golgotha pointed toward the same truth. Jesus was exactly who he claimed to be. Even the hardened soldiers guarding the crucifixion were terrified by what they had seen. The darkness, the shaking earth, the open graves, the strange authority in Jesus' final words. Together they created a moment impossible to forget. Romans chapter 5 verse 8 declares, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." That truth reached even a Roman centurion standing at the foot of the cross. If this story is opening your eyes to what truly happened at the cross, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the next moments after the burial of Jesus became one of the most powerful events ever recorded in human history. And while fear and confusion spread through Jerusalem, a small group of secret followers was already preparing for the next chapter of the story. As fear spread across Jerusalem, two men finally stepped out from the shadows, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Both respected members of the Sanhedrin could no longer remain silent followers. The same council that had condemned Jesus now watched two of its own openly honor him in death. Joseph went directly to Pilate and requested the body of Jesus. That decision carried enormous risk. To publicly associate with a crucified man accused of blasphemy could destroy his reputation, his position, and everything he had spent his life building. Yet at the very moment most people were hiding in fear, Joseph chose courage. Nicodemus came beside him. This was the same Pharisee who had once visited Jesus secretly at night, asking how a man could be born again. Now he arrived openly, carrying an extraordinary mixture of myrrh and aloes for burial. John chapter 19 verse 39 says, "He was accompanied by Nicodemus." Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. This was not the burial of a criminal. It was the burial of a king. Together, they carefully wrapped the body of Jesus in linen cloths, according to Jewish custom. The hands pierced by nails, the brow wounded by thorns, the body broken upon the cross, now rested in the hands of men who finally understood who he truly was. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 9 had foretold it centuries earlier. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death. Joseph placed Jesus in a new tomb carved into solid rock, a tomb where no one had ever been laid before. Then a massive stone was rolled across the entrance. To many watching, it looked final. The cross was over, the body was buried, the tomb was sealed. But the religious leaders still feared him. Matthew chapter 27 verses 62 to 66 tells us that the chief priests and Pharisees went to Pilate, demanding extra security around the tomb. "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Even after his death, they could not escape his words. Pilate agreed to their request. Roman guards were stationed at the tomb. The stone was officially sealed under Roman authority. Breaking that seal carried the penalty of death. Every possible precaution was taken. Armed soldiers, a sealed tomb, a massive stone, the authority of Rome itself. They believed they could contain the story inside a grave, but every step they took only strengthened the evidence for what was about to happen next. The guards would become witnesses. The sealed stone would become proof. The guarded tomb would become the center of the greatest event in history. For a moment, death appeared victorious, but heaven was already preparing for resurrection. What happened next changed human history forever. The tomb had been sealed. Roman guards stood watch. The stone blocking the entrance was massive, heavy enough to silence every remaining hope of Jesus' followers. But the grave could not hold him. At dawn, several women approached the tomb carrying spices to honor the body of Jesus. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome walked through the quiet streets filled with grief, still trying to process everything they had witnessed at the cross. One question troubled them as they neared the garden tomb. Who would move the stone away? Then the ground shook again. Matthew chapter 28 verses 1 to 6 says, "There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. The guards froze in terror. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men." The stone had not been moved so Jesus could escape. The tomb was opened so the world could witness what had already happened. The angel then spoke the words that shattered death forever. "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. He is not here, has risen." Those words transformed everything. The women stepped into the tomb, expecting death, and found evidence of resurrection instead. The burial cloths remained behind exactly where his body had been laid. John chapter 20 says the linen cloth was folded separately, a quiet but powerful sign that this was no robbery, no chaos, no stolen body. Jesus had risen in victory. Over the following days, he appeared again and again to his followers. He walked with disciples on the road to Emmaus. He stood among the 11 and showed them his wounded hands. He ate with them beside the Sea of Galilee. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 declares that he appeared to more than 500 believers. These were not visions born from grief, not legends created generations later. The disciples saw him alive. The same men who had hidden in fear after the crucifixion now became fearless witnesses. Peter preached openly in Jerusalem. Thomas, once filled with doubt, fell before Jesus and declared, "My Lord and my God." The resurrection changed everything. The darkness over Jerusalem had not ended in defeat. The earthquake had not announced destruction. The torn veil had not marked the end. All of it pointed toward this moment. The empty tomb became proof that sin had been defeated, death had lost its authority, and Jesus Christ was exactly who he claimed to be. As Jesus himself declared in John chapter 11 verse 25, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." Van 9, Ket luantendoi, keo goi duktim. But even after all this evidence, even after all these signs, not everyone believed. Some chose silence over surrender, denial over discipleship. Thousands witnessed these signs. Not all responded the same way. Some wept at the foot of the cross, their hearts broken by the weight of what they saw. Some ran in terror from the earthquake and darkness, unable to process the supernatural display. Some worshipped when they encountered the risen Christ, their lives forever changed by his presence. Others covered it up. They paid the guards to spread lies. They chose political convenience over spiritual truth. They saw the evidence and rejected it anyway. The religious leaders had demanded signs, and God gave them 7 undeniable miracles. They had asked for proof, and creation itself testified to Jesus' identity. Yet many of them hardened their hearts and continued in unbelief. The question that echoes through history is the same one that confronts us today. If you had been there, would you have seen or dismissed? Would you have been like the centurion, whose heart was opened by what he witnessed? Or like the religious leaders who explained away even the most obvious miracles? The sky still speaks. Every sunset reminds us of the day it went dark at noon. The earth still trembles, but now we know it's not just geology. It's the echo of that cosmic moment when the ground shook at Jesus' death. The veil is still torn, the way is still open, and the invitation still stands. The grave is still empty, not just the tomb in Jerusalem, but every tomb that holds a believer. Death has lost its sting. The resurrection isn't just Jesus' victory, it's our hope, our future, our guaranteed inheritance. But here's what matters most. This isn't just history, this is your moment. These 7 events didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened for you. The darkness fell so you could walk in light. The earth shook so your foundation could be solid. The veil tore so you could come home. The dead rose so you could live forever. The centurion believed, so you could know that grace reaches everyone. The tomb was sealed so the resurrection would be undeniable. And Jesus rose so you could rise with him. What will you do with that truth? How will you respond to the evidence? The same choice that faced those who witnessed these miracles firsthand now faces you. Will you see or dismiss? Will you believe or explain away? Will you surrender or remain silent? This is more than history. This is your invitation to experience the same resurrection power that raised Jesus from the dead. It's your opportunity to walk through the torn veil into God's presence. It's your chance to find hope beyond the grave. If this message has stirred something in your heart, don't let it stay with you alone. Share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that the darkness doesn't have the final word, that the earthquake settles into solid ground, that the veil is torn and the way is open. Someone needs to know that the grave is empty and hope is alive. The 7 signs still point to the same truth. Jesus is exactly who he claimed to be, and that changes everything. If you believe the empty tomb changed history forever, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone who needs hope today. Because Jesus did not remain in the grave, and his story is still changing lives across the world right now.